There you go. Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. I wanted to alert you that we are recording this, if only for Louisa Conlon, who can't be here today. She's a kid having a birthday. So I wanted to let you know this is being recorded. We're very happy to welcome the Lakeys. This is the second of our two-part Lakey weekend. Over 40 of us gathered last night for a pizza and a movie and some questions, and it was pretty amazingly wonderful. We're very lucky today to have Dan Zamitis, aka Dr. Z, from MFS, the Chester Reagan Chair of Quaker Studies, to introduce George and Ingrid. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. So, full disclosure, I printed this out. I had it on my counter ready to go, and of course, in rushing here, I forgot it. But fortunately, I had saved it on my phone. So I apologize for reading off the phone. It's not something I like to do, but I will be doing it. And when Barb asked me to prepare these remarks, really struggled. And actually, Judy just said something too. Like, how do I encapsulate all of the work that's been done by George over the last, I'm not going to say how many years, I don't want to embarrass George, in his work. And you really can't. But Friday, I sat down to write these down, and it really flowed naturally because it's very easy to write about somebody who's done so much for both the Quaker community but the world at large in his work and dedication. But friends, we are gathered here today to engage with one of the leading activists and teachers in the modern Quaker community, George Lakey. George's activism has spanned decades, starting in the 1950s with his work in the Ban the Bomb movement, and continuing in the 60s with his work during the civil rights campaigns. Throughout his life, George's activism has stemmed from his deeply held spiritual and personal convictions. He has sought, in the best way possible, to let his life speak by continually seeking to confront injustice wherever he saw it. He has worked on a diverse variety of causes, including civil rights, LGBTQ rights, nuclear disarmament and peace work, social justice, and environmental justice. Whether working to help educate the next generation of activists or through his direct action campaigns, George has worked to create a better world for each of us, a world where justice and human dignity are lauded and not hidden away. For me personally, as an educator, George's work in helping to train others in nonviolent activism is a truly amazing legacy. His written and spoken works have helped to inspire people of all kinds to try and create the change in the world they want to see. I wholeheartedly believe that education is the only way to truly change the world, and I'm tremendously appreciative of the work George has done in helping to ensure future generations understand the power of nonviolent direct action. Most recently, George's work with the Earth Quaker Action Team has sought to address environmental injustice which threatens the world in which we live. By fearlessly seeking nonviolent change, the example that George has put forth is one we can all learn from. I'm honored to welcome George and his daughter Ingrid to Moorestown Meeting today. I'm excited to hear them share his story with us. Welcome.
So the film has so much about movements. We're going to try a little bit of movement right now, which is to encourage everyone to come into these center parts. So we're a little less far from each other. So you guys are great. We're going to come in a little closer to each other. Thank you. So I'm Ingrid. I'm George's youngest. I'm going to sort of get us started. I wanted to first just check in and find out how many people have seen Citizen George, the film.
How many people?
How many? If you have seen it, the film, Citizen George, raise your hand. Okay, so that's most folks, but not everybody. Okay, great. I want to just share a little bit of the story about how the film came to be. We're going to have a little chance to talk with each other. There's a piece, I think, that's important that I will make sure my dad gets to share. So we'll have some talk time, and then we're going to have some sing time. I don't know about y'all. We need some sing time. One of my dad's not hidden superpowers is that he loves leading Broadway show tune sing-alongs. So that is sometimes surprising to people, but it is very true. I wanted to share, so the idea for this film, it started around 5 years ago. Zane Nakota, who's one of the people in the film, he's the executive director of Training for Change, an organization my dad started. He, for some time, had been saying, you know, there should be a film made about you, George, and about the work that you've done, your perspective, experiences, telling the story of movements. So he had this idea, was doing a little agitating around it. There was also a Quaker couple, Lynn and Bill Oberfield, who also were like, George, there really should be a film made about you. And they were both recently retired, and they said, and we've got some energy to put into it. So that's a great thing when an idea comes from several places, and then there are people who are like, and we have energy to put into it. And like Quakers do, they created a committee. So there became a committee of folks to fundraise to make a film about George Lakey. And what felt really important was that this was not just a film that was going to be like just speaking to Quakers or just speaking to activists. There was a real consciousness around, are we making this a training film? The downside of that would be, the people who would go to that would be the people who say, I know I need training. And so we were like, what would it be like to make a film that anyone could find their way into, to connect with? So we found a filmmaker, Glenn Holston, who made the film, who is not a Quaker, who is not an activist, and who's a brilliant filmmaker. And that felt like a really critical moment, to find someone who's not already like steeped in it, to figure out how to tell a story, a complex story, a story that would actually be able to reach farther than sort of an insider point of view. So that just is an important context to have about the film. It took some convincing for this guy to say, okay. And one of the things we did not know at that time was all the work it takes to make a movie, the amount of money it takes to make a movie, or the moment we would be in when it was complete. That feels like there were several moments where we had to move forward with faith. Move forward with faith that we'd find the right director, that we would find the money. We still are fundraising for it. So the director joined in the faith journey of like, we'll go forward and make it, and we'll find out, will the resources come? So we're still fundraising for it. And we didn't know when the film would really truly be done. And I think we have found that it was done at exactly the right time. So that's just a little bit of the context for this film. So I want to just encourage you to take a moment to turn to the person next to you. And if you saw the film, either yesterday or earlier than that, to just take a moment to share with the person next to you something that is moving in you from the film. Is there something that you're sitting with that is in your heart that you want to just share with the person next to you? If you have not seen the film, share with your partner, why are you here? Go for it. Talk to the person next to you.
Aspect of it. We have not seen the film. We have not seen the film about this election. I haven't seen the film about justice and because I didn't know anything.
So that bothers me, but it's just, just getting glimpses through the movie. There's a whole life that seems outside of what's been happening before, but his columnists and his
You're kind of person. I am nice. I know that. And I think we have to do that.
Just another minute to make sure you both get to share. Or if there's a third person near you who's not talking to someone, grab it.
So just
Bob said you can keep coming over today. What time? No, I can't, but I just want to make sure I get this back.
I changed exactly. Thanks to
Wrap up that dot. Finish that thought, please.
and the beauty of this.
So I'd love to hear just a couple of examples. What is something that is moving in you and from the film? Let's hear just from a couple people. Yeah.
You know, I've had a hard time with people.
Sure, please. Tell us your name.
Joanna.
Joanna.
Cynthia. And my whole life, of course, I was raised a Quaker. I was still with the idea that nonviolence was the way to do things, but I was never convinced when people said to me, well, what happened? I mean, if we didn't have a military, other countries would take over. I mean, you have to have a military to defend your country and all of that. And you, Dr. Vicky, made me realize the nonviolent approach is more powerful.
Nonviolent approach is more powerful. Thank you. Is there another person who wants to share what is moving in you from watching the film? Yeah.
I was really impressed by George's calmness through all these very, very difficult, challenging situations, and just his complete 1,000% commitment to his faith, which is really, really difficult for me to get my arms around. So they're very inspired by that.
Yeah, I that piece about what does it mean to be faithful and how do we continue to be faithful is such an important piece, I think, of this story. And actually, do you want to just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. I mean, of course, now I'm in a total panic.
I was wondering if you had emotion, if that showed rage or anger.
Yeah, I've seen some of that.
Oh, yeah. Really important in safe places to let go, let all the emotions out, including tears and despair and all of that. Yeah. And of course, being a Quaker matters a tremendous lot, too, about all that. But I'm also reassured by my sociology, because that's my field. And actually, though, I have to admit, it's the biggest mistake I ever made in my profession of sociology. So I'm going to admit that mistake to you. The mistake is that a dozen years ago, I was tracking the polarization that was going on in our country. And that, of course, is one of the obsessions of sociologists. We tend to look at any group or social system in terms of how integrated is it as compared with how fractionated it is. We just notice that, right? And I was noticing the fractionating and thought, oh my gosh, this is big, this is terrible. How are we going to get done the things that we need to get done in terms of racial justice and other kinds of justice and peace if we're busy throwing stuff at each other, right? And so I was worrying about that a dozen years ago. However, at that particular time, I was also doing a book tour through England. And there was a place in England where I was sleeping overnight in a Quaker family, and the guy in the family was an artist. And his house was full of his art. And I was wandering around this beautiful house full of sculptures, because his art was sculpture, metal sculpture. And I was marveling at how beautiful these objects were. I went to him and I said, I want to know, how do you get metal to do what you want to do? Because metal is hard, and it's not, it has a mind of its own, you might say. And he said, oh, let me tell you my secret. Come on, follow me. So we go out the back door, into the backyard. That's where his studio is. We go into the studio, and he proudly presents his kiln. And he says, that's what enables me to do it. I don't get it, I don't get it. He said, yeah, you're right. Metal doesn't want to do what I want to do. But if I heat it in a kiln and make it soft, I can do what I want to do with it. And I said, thank you. This is what I needed, a metaphor for what we're going through. Polarization is a kiln, friends. It gets society going, which is what steel needs, what iron needs in order to be able to get mushy. Our society is getting mushy. More and more questions are up. And that's exactly the time when we can make tremendous progress. What's the evidence for that? George, evidence. How about the 1930s? Nazis were able to fill Madison Square Garden in the 30s. There was a tremendous Nazi movement in this country. And of course, the civil rights movement was going like that. The labor movement was going like that. It was the glory period of the American Communist Party. I mean, Nazis, communists, would you say there's kind of a tremendous uproar, tremendous conflict? And I would argue the 30s, that decade, was the biggest progress that we made in the first half of the 20th century. Oh my gosh, this is so contradictory to what I was imagining. So what about another case, George? Because, well, Germany in that period went to Hitler. That was my prediction. But US was contradicting it. What about another case? How about the 1960s? Well, I was born in the 60s. Some of you were born in the 60s, right? Or
You were born in the 30s.
30. Thank you.
You were very active in the 60s.
I was active in the 60s. I was born in the 30s. Active in the 60s. In the 60s, you remember, some of you, tremendous turbulence, right? The Nazis were back. Lots of stuff going on in the left, tremendous conflict going on in the left. Civil rights movement, the Ku Klux Klan had moved from killing individuals to bombing churches in the 60s. Tremendous conflict going on in the 60s, and I would argue it was the period of greatest progress that we made in the second half of the 20th century. So I'm beginning to see a tremendous contradiction here. Times of turbulence, of conflict, of violence can be times when we make the biggest progress. There is our chance. That's why I'm calling polarization now a kiln. It's melting. Things that used to seem very solid and strong are now up in question. That's our opportunity. If we want to be a sculptor, like the Quaker in town in England. I think we want to be a sculptor, right? I know I do. So that keeps reassuring me. So yes, I read the paper every day. My family will tell you, they'll walk into the kitchen and there I am crying over the Morning Inquirer. Cry. There's lots to be said about it. It's real, it's true. And don't forget the killing.
I'm wondering if there are some questions or, reactions to this concept, or if there's value to this concept to you right now in understanding this moment we're in.
I really appreciate you speaking of that, because one of the things that I think we've seen a lot of in the news is to talk about the hardening of the sides. People entrenching themselves in their tribes and their groups, and the lack of communication between us. And I think that there is a fear that I know I have and that I know that my students have of that. But to hear the idea, and the more I think about it, the more I can see where George is coming from with this, of that seeming hardening of the sides is in fact allowing for a certain creative chaos to start to come about, where that hopefully change can come out of that. And one of the things that I most appreciate about the movie and the story is that the ability to persevere in moments where you don't know if change can come. And you don't know, you start a campaign or an idea or a movement, not necessarily knowing that the outcome will even happen. But I think looking at these periods of time that can be frightening and stressful as opportunities to mold the metal into what you want it to be is reassuring and I think inspirational and helpful. I know for me personally, and I think, from a perspective of people who want to see change in the world around.
Yeah, I want to just like lift up a piece of what you're saying. We were at Fosington meeting last night where they saw the film and we did a Q&A and sang some Broadway. And the first question was actually about, I feel paralyzed. I feel demoralized. I'm terrified, right? And you can feel, can't you feel that in your body? Like just like the tightness of that? And then somebody else asked about the polarization piece. We heard that. And I could actually physically feel loosening in the body, right? So if this is a time where we need maybe to be a little looser, like not tight, where's our creativity gonna come from if we're like this, right? And these are times that really invite us to be creative. So finding a different way of orienting to this moment could be a huge gift to us, our own sustainability, our own spiritual depth, and also in actually making change. I want to give a little shout out to the balcony where Daniel Hunter is up here with Avery. And Daniel's in the film as well, you may recognize him. And Daniel and my dad and some others were we're really the ones who created Choose Democracy 4 years ago. And so that was a moment of saying like, how are we really gonna mobilize? And we trained 10,000 people. And Daniel's been doing some really, really powerful writing. And if you're on the Choose Democracy list, you're hearing his voice about what these moments are and how we're taking care of ourselves and each other and thinking about staying in motion. So I want to just give a shout out to Daniel, who's part of the Moorestown Friends School community as well. So I see you are just raring to go.
I think we have to really try to see something tiny as it is good in what I think is a terrible presidency, and trying to find that little something and work on it and go at it to them actively, forcefully, but without insulting anybody, including expressing our views exactly. If I were to say exactly what I think, that would be very insulting and it probably would make no difference. But if I find a little something that I want to work on and work on it without insulting Donald Trump or anybody there, but pointing to the truth and leaving them almost, if I can find my way to write a letter that says something to them that they think it's their idea almost, and it can be done sometimes.
Right, well, that idea of what do we bring is really,
So what would be to see a teeny little something to work on?
Well, I wouldn't even say teeny, actually, because the scope of the situation
huge.
we're in means we can actually think more broadly than we often do. One of the things about that sculptor is he had a vision of what he wanted to make, right? We often forget that it's possible to be visionary. We can get very into being pragmatic, especially those of us involved in politics, and forget that a situation like this invites a visionary. And that's what was going on in the 30s in the United States, and in the 60s in the United States, Martin Luther King, others, bringing a vision of way bigger the sculptor also brings to that metal. And we've gotten, I think, way too pragmatic. It's an opportunity to become visionary. One reason why I wrote Viking Economics is because it provides, well, I cheated a little bit. I chose what's actually working. So I could have been more visionary, but I thought, well, let's at least, it looks very visionary. If you go over there, it seems visionary because it's so remarkably different from here. So much more individual freedom. Individual freedom. The Scandinavians have more than we do. They have more economic justice, by far, hugely more. They're way ahead of us on climate. There's just a number of things that they have. But they went through their revolutionary period, their 20s and 30s, a time when the Nazis were marching, but there were people who said, let's create a vision and ask our people, would you like that? And they asked the people, and the people said, whoa, that sounds good. And we could do that. We could support people who are visionaries and start projecting something that's way better. In some ways, you can look at the Trump Trump victory as a victory for vision, because there were many Latinos and black people and poor people who voted for Trump because it looked like he was more of a visionary than his opponent. And things were so bad, are so bad, and even though Biden improved things, still lots of people left out right in our country. And the Democratic candidate was not offering a vision. Was not offering a vision. This, friends, is a time to offer a vision of something substantially better that will animate people and motivate people to fight for that vision. Fight nonviolently, of course, which is the way of making it more likely we'll get it. So I would invite Quakers who become, I think, very gradualist in a way. I mean, we've been accommodating how things are, to return to our roots. Because were we revolutionary and did we have a vision in the 17th century? I mean, William Penn actually, talk about bold, said to the king, I want a piece of land. New Jersey and Pennsylvania is what it got to be called. Right? I'm talking about visionary. We've got an incredible history of visionaries in our society. I would say, let's return to that. That's what people are hungry for. Or else pseudo-visions like that offered by Trump and Musk, who is himself, in a sense, a visionary, right? Will keep triumphing on the grounds that, well, at least these guys have vision, whereas the Democrats are all, good luck and maybe we'll improve things some.
I think we're gonna wrap this part shortly so that we can do a little singing, but I see your hand.
Yes, I have a question. So I run a nonprofit that works at the intersection of sport and LGBTQ inclusion. Been doing that for 14 years, and very scary time in this. It's a national nonprofit with chapters across the country. And I think one of the things I agree with the opportunity. I feel it in the kids that we work with across college campuses. The challenge that I'm curious to hear your feedback on is, on the one hand, many of the athletes with whom I work are LGBTQ athletes who are feeling afraid, scared, not wanting to necessarily open a door for a bridge building conversation with somebody that might really be hostile towards them. And yet, what I'm trying to do with my organization is extend that arm and build that bridge and create that community. And I struggle with the message that will resonate and not the core of the athletes with whom I work, not make them feel betrayed or not seen, but also how to call people in who do disagree and who might be hostile. I want to hold both, but I don't fully know how to do it and without causing harm.
I would suggest finding examples of people who are being bold and tell your folks about those folks. because that's what really worked. It was contagion in the 60s. I mean, Dr. King being the best known example, but many, many people who didn't get known the way Dr. King did, but who in their own sectors, you know, all over the place, were being way bolder in the 60s than they had been in the 50s. Way bolder. And then that would, oh my gosh, well, could I do that? Maybe I could do it. Maybe together anyway. I know we could do this. And like that. And it started to spread because again, you have the kiln working for you. So what might have been hard to do 10 years ago gets easier now because, in a sense, all bets are off. You know what I mean? Things are getting crazy, right? So you just become one more species of crazy. But I mean, for the folks who are tearing it down, you always have critics, always critics. I've always had critics within the Society of Friends and elsewhere. And obviously it didn't tone me down too much. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything? I don't know if you heard the question. I'm just putting you on the spot real quick. No?
Didn't hear the question.
Well, I'll just say a little bit that I think there's several parts of this. It's not just one thing. I think for people who are really under direct threat right now, I think affinity groups are incredibly important. Being able to be with each other and talk with each other about what is happening and what fears there are, and also what resources there are. Like, how do we see each other as resources? How do we really touch base with our allies? How do we know what that looks like? How do I talk about what that looks like? How do I say what I need? And then finding out what steps are people willing to take. This is a time where we're all gonna have to figure out, how do I take my next step out of my comfort zone, you know, to be who God is calling me to be. I think of the story of you coming out at Friends General Conference in 1974. You didn't have to do that. They sure didn't invite you. Right? And
It was a plenary talk. I was doing the plenary talk in the evening.
Right, and again, it wasn't, George, could you come and, you know, shot the role of, you know, by coming out. That was not what you were invited to do, but you were invited to be faithful. And that's what you did. To some risk, I don't think we do bodily risk, but reputational risk, right? There was
big time.
Your
Doors shut.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were doors shut.
So there's that story. And then from this past week, there's the story of the Bishop of Washington, Marian Buddy.
Yeah.
She wasn't asked to do that. But she was being faithful to some risk to her. If I were her, I'd be a little scared right now. Am I really grateful she did that? Yes, I am. Did she make more space for others of us to be brave and be courageous and do scary things? Yes. So maybe that's part of the answer too, right? It's connected to what you said. Who can we look to who is like, I'm taking this step forward? Are we gonna leave those people out there on their own, or am I also gonna step forward? How are we moving the whole line forward? I think I'm not sure that's a complete answer, but it's a piece. We have to take each other's fear seriously and not just feed the fear though. Not say that's where the story ends. So okay, be small. That's what Trump wants us to do. He wants us to get freaked out and get small. And that's not the answer. Now what it looks like to be big is gonna be different for different people. And there was somebody who spoke during sort of a post-work, right after worship, I'll come in 1 second, that said something about privilege, recognizing the privilege, that it's a certain kind of privilege to be committed to nonviolence or to do nonviolent action. I want to say that every single person has some kind of privilege, right? And I'm not sure that's actually the best frame for us to think about this moment. Because if we think about King, if we think about the children in the Children's March who went to jail, you could say they had no privilege, right? They didn't have, and yet they said, we're doing this. So I think it's important, we absolutely need to know our position in society where we have some kind of safety. And I don't think that means people with privilege get to do things and people without privilege get to do things. We all have some kind of privilege, including that we're connected with each other. But I just wanted to say, I know you had something, and you have something, and I think we should make a little space for something.
I hope I can put this together. I just want to say that I'm not sure bold necessarily means extreme. I just think that being extreme is good enough. I have to say police, but extreme is part of our problem. We've got the left, and sometimes it's really extreme, and we've got the right, and it's extreme. And like the kiln, if you burn metal, it doesn't, you can't move it anymore. It cracks, it gets brittle. And we have to find boldness where others can feel it, participate in it. Because what happens is the loudness, the noise is what is dividing us. The people in the middle could find some reason and maybe be bold again to stand up, but the loud voices are taking over. And first we have to work with our own families. I have a brother who's a sculptor, a metal sculptor, who and now he's listening to boxings on the other side. I can tell you the story about why and what took him there. And it was an extreme situation where he was rejected because of the left. How can a white man do a black sculpture? He's an artist. And when you see what moves people to the fringe, it makes it real. It's too much heat. It's too extreme. And I'm struggling with my own thing.
Well, my response to that is that in the 30s, there were people on the left who went way overboard. That didn't prevent the people kind of next in from moving forward. So they didn't keep their eye on what that was about. They were doing what they could do, and they were making the difference. The people on the extreme left, especially the folks that turned to violence, and again in the 60s, were not doing anybody a favor, including themselves, but it didn't stop the other people from being bold in their countries. And that's what our job is. So our job isn't actually to try to control the folks who go too far. I mean, sometimes if you happen to have an avenue, if it's your cousin, you try to talk them out of it. But our job is to exemplify what it looks like to people like that bishop did, like we have in our best times done, and not worry about the extremes. The extremes will do. That's part of polarization. The extremes will do their thing. Okay, so they do their thing. So what? I mean, it's sad. I cry about it. I'm alive to my emotions about it. But I don't let that stop me from being the kind of bold that will be an inspiration for others. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, you're going to do the final.
Okay, I have a real question for you, George and Ingrid both. How do you decide when it's the right time to stand up and speak about something that you feel has come from someplace beyond you that you must speak, or to do an action? In your experience, what has led you to, or forced you to, stand up and be bold, take an action, or say something? What have been the signs? I just need to know.
Yeah, most times it's God saying, do it. And sometimes that really shakes me up. For example, when Spirit said, join the people who are going to, who are going to try to get through the U.S. Navy to Vietnam with medical supplies. That story is in the film. I went to my meeting and asked for a clearance committee because I wanted to be sure it really was Spirit that was doing that and not some kind of fantasy of whatever. And the clearance committee That was a long meeting. That was a long meeting, because we all knew it was risking my life. And at the end, they said, you are clearly being led to volunteer for the Phoenix Project, and we will make sure that the meeting takes care of your children if you don't come back.
I'll just add to it, which is a similar part, which is sometimes sometimes I have an inner knowingness, and that it feels like a compulsion, a must move now. But another part of it is not being alone in making a decision about it. So it is a clearance committee, or Daniel is one of my dearest friends, and so sometimes it's like, I need a hand here, or calling a group of friends together to say, I am struggling, I feel like I'm supposed to do a thing. So it's not always clear, like exactly what is the thing, right? What is it that I am called to do? The other thing is, sometimes it's a matter of paying attention. You know, Quakers have this way of talking about way opening. Paying attention is a part of it. And so if we're only doom scrolling, it might be hard to pay attention to where the door is just opened and said, come in. Right, when I had my baby in 2009, I had decided to take a year off of my paid work in public radio, and to be a full-time parent. At the same time, in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, there was this big energy around, like, what are we doing about climate change? And so there was this, like, we need to start a nonviolent direct action campaign. So I started going to those early meetings with my infant baby because I had the time. I wasn't a full-time parent and a full-time employee somewhere. We ended up deciding to found Earthquake Action Team, and I became its first sort of director. So really, I didn't end up not working. I just didn't get paid. But that's an example of way opening. I had made a decision about this is how what I'm going to do around my paid, career. I'm going to do this parenting thing. What opened for me is I have this infant, and I must act on climate change. It didn't actually feel like a lot of a choice. It was, and I'm joining a movement of friends who are saying, we're doing a thing. And so I joined it and became part of it. So I think it's paying attention, listening to others, having others who listen to you and what you already know. That is what a clearness process is about, right? And what is Spirit asking us. We could talk for a lot longer, but I'm actually going to wrap us up because I really do want to recognize that I think your usual way is to kind of be off to do other things, and I know some people will be off to do it.
Could I just do a PS to your story?
Do it.
Which is, so you heard that. So what happened with that campaign? That campaign was out to force PNC Bank to give up financing mountaintop removal coal mining in Appalachia, right? There were people phoning me saying, George, now you've really lost it. You are not going to force the 7th largest bank in the country into giving up a profitable line, of investment. And I said, well, we'll see. Okay, we did it. We forced the 7th largest bank in the country. Thank you, and many people who found that was their way of acting. Yes, we were, at first, it was a big deal to both go after